The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of Monterey County Superior Court as news vans lined the street. Reporters clutched their microphones, cameramen adjusted their equipment, and curious onlookers gathered behind police barriers. Everyone was waiting for the same thing: Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood to arrive for what many expected would be his most challenging performance yet. But this time, there would be no cameras rolling, no director calling cut, and no second chances. At exactly 9:15 a.m., a simple black sedan pulled up to the courthouse. The crowd pressed forward as the rear door opened, and out stepped the man himself. At 85 years old, Clint Eastwood still carried that unmistakable presence that had made him a star for over 5 decades. His weathered face showed the lines of age, but his eyes remained sharp and focused. He wore a plain navy suit, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed Hollywood. He looked more like a retired businessman than one of the most famous actors in the world. The whispers started immediately. "That's really him," someone said. "He looks older than in the movies," another voice added. "I wonder if he'll actually have to testify." The crowd parted as Eastwood walked steadily toward the courthouse entrance, his legal team flanking him on both sides. His lead attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s, whispered something in his ear. Eastwood nodded but said nothing to the reporters, shouting questions at him. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric. The case had drawn attention from across the country. It wasn't every day that a Hollywood legend faced a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, especially one involving complex construction contracts and business dealings. The plaintiff, Coastal Construction Group, claimed that Eastwood had breached his contract on a luxury resort development project near his hometown of Carmel. They were seeking $12 million in damages, claiming his last-minute changes and demands had cost them enormous amounts of money and ruined their reputation. The courtroom itself was packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled with a mix of legal professionals, journalists, curious locals, and even some tourists who had stumbled upon the spectacle. Court security had to turn away dozens of people who couldn't find seats. The bailiffs moved through the crowd, reminding everyone that this was a real legal proceeding, not entertainment. Judge Patricia Williams entered the courtroom with the confidence of someone who had been doing this job for 23 years. She was known throughout the county as one of the toughest judges on the bench. Lawyers often joked that appearing before Judge Williams was like facing a firing squad with a law degree. She had zero patience for nonsense, even less tolerance for celebrity privilege, and a reputation for cutting straight through legal arguments to find the truth. As she took her seat behind the bench, Judge Williams barely glanced at the famous defendant. She had seen it all in her years on the bench: celebrities trying to charm their way out of trouble, wealthy defendants who thought money could buy justice, and famous people who believed their status put them above the law. In her mind, Clint Eastwood was just another actor who had gotten in over his head with a business deal he didn't understand. The construction company's legal team looked confident as they arranged their materials at the plaintiff's table. They had boxes of documents, detailed construction plans, financial records, and a list of witnesses ready to testify about Eastwood's alleged breach of contract. Their lead counsel, a man who had built his career on complex construction litigation, seemed almost eager to begin. He had told reporters outside that this case was straightforward: a celebrity who thought he could change the rules whenever he felt like it was about to learn that contracts mean something in the real world. On the defense side, things looked quite different. Eastwood sat quietly at his table, surrounded by his legal team but somehow appearing isolated. He wasn't schmoozing with his lawyers or playing to the crowd like many celebrities might. Instead, he was reading through a thick stack of papers, occasionally making notes in the margins with a simple pen. His concentration was intense, almost scholarly. It was the kind of focus you might expect from a student preparing for the most important exam of their life. What struck many observers was how ordinary Eastwood seemed in this setting. Strip away the Hollywood glamour, the movie star persona, and the legendary status, and he looked like any other defendant facing serious financial consequences. He didn't wave to the crowd, didn't smile for the cameras that managed to sneak shots through the courtroom windows, and didn't engage in the kind of theatrical behavior that often accompanies celebrity court cases. The case centered around a luxury resort project that Eastwood had been developing on prime coastal property. The construction company claimed they had signed a detailed contract to build the resort according to specific plans and timelines. But according to their lawsuit, Eastwood had repeatedly changed his demands, insisted on expensive modifications, and ultimately walked away from the project, leaving them with enormous costs and no way to recover their investment. As the morning progressed and the formal proceedings were about to begin, there was a sense of anticipation in the room that went beyond typical courtroom drama. This wasn't just about money or contracts. It was about whether one of America's most iconic actors could handle himself in a real-world legal battle. Many in attendance expected to witness either a spectacular victory by a Hollywood legend or an equally spectacular fall from grace. The court clerk called the case to order, and Judge Williams looked out over the packed courtroom. Her expression suggested she was already annoyed by the circus atmosphere surrounding what should have been a straightforward business dispute. She had made it clear in pre-trial hearings that she wouldn't tolerate any special treatment for the famous defendant. Eastwood remained focused on his documents, occasionally conferring quietly with his attorneys. He seemed completely absorbed in the legal materials, showing none of the nervousness or showmanship that might be expected from someone facing such serious financial consequences. His behavior was so understated that some observers wondered if he truly understood the gravity of his situation. The stage was set for what everyone expected would be a classic David versus Goliath story, except in this version, David was a construction company, and Goliath was one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. But as the proceedings were about to begin, nobody in that courtroom could have predicted just how wrong their assumptions about Clint Eastwood would prove to be. The man who had made his career playing tough, no-nonsense characters was about to face the ultimate test of whether life could imitate art, or if the courtroom would prove that Hollywood magic had no power in the real world of law and justice. Judge Williams picked up her gavel and struck it firmly against the wooden block. The sound echoed through the packed courtroom, and instantly, all conversations stopped. Every person in the room turned their attention to the bench where she sat, looking down at the assembled crowd with the stern expression that had made her famous throughout the county. "This court is now in session," she announced in a voice that carried authority from years of commanding courtrooms. "We are here today to hear the case of Coastal Construction Group versus Clint Eastwood." She paused and looked directly at the defense table where Eastwood sat quietly reviewing his papers. "Before we begin, I want to make something absolutely clear to everyone in this room." The judge's voice grew harder, more pointed. "I don't care if you're a movie star, a rock singer, or the President of the United States. In my courtroom, everyone is equal under the law. There will be no special treatment, no dramatic speeches, and no playing to the cameras." Her eyes fixed on Eastwood, who looked up from his documents to meet her gaze. "Mr. Eastwood, I trust you understand that this is a real courtroom, not a movie set. We deal in facts here, not fiction." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the gallery. Some reporters exchanged glances, already sensing that this case would provide them with the kind of drama their readers loved. Judge Williams wasn't finished, though. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on an even sharper edge. "I've seen too many celebrities come through these doors thinking their fame gives them some kind of special status," she continued. "They expect judges to be starstruck, juries to be impressed, and opponents to be intimidated. Well, let me tell you something. None of that works in here. This courtroom operates on evidence, law, and logic. Nothing else matters." Eastwood said nothing in response. He simply nodded once and returned his attention to the stack of papers in front of him. This seemed to irritate Judge Williams even more. She had expected some kind of reaction, maybe a charm offensive or an attempt to win her over. Instead, she got silence and what appeared to be indifference. "Furthermore," she added, her voice rising slightly, "I want it clearly understood that I have no patience for legal theatrics. If you think you can turn this proceeding into some kind of performance, you're badly mistaken." She gestured toward the packed gallery. "The fact that half the county has shown up to watch doesn't change the fact that this is about a construction contract, not entertainment." The construction company's legal team was loving every minute of this. Their lead attorney, Peterson, exchanged satisfied looks with his colleagues. They had worried that Eastwood's celebrity status might work against them, that the judge might be influenced by his fame. Instead, it was clear that Judge Williams was going to be tougher on the famous defendant than she would be on an ordinary person. Peterson stood up, straightening his expensive suit. "Your Honor, we appreciate your commitment to treating all parties equally. My client, Coastal Construction Group, simply wants justice. They entered into a good faith contract with Mr. Eastwood, only to have him change the terms whenever it suited him." He gestured dramatically toward Eastwood. "This is a classic case of a powerful celebrity thinking the rules don't apply to him." Judge Williams nodded approvingly. "Mr. Peterson, please proceed with your opening statement, and let's keep this focused on the facts, not personalities." As Peterson began laying out his case, he grew more confident with each passing minute. The judge was clearly on their side, or at least hostile to their famous opponent. He described Eastwood as a demanding, unreasonable client who had made impossible requests and then abandoned the project when things got difficult. "Your Honor," Peterson said, his voice growing stronger, "Mr. Eastwood may know how to direct movies, but he clearly doesn't understand the complexities of construction law. He treated our detailed contract like a rough draft of a screenplay, something he could rewrite whenever inspiration struck." More laughter rippled through the courtroom, and Judge Williams didn't discourage it. Throughout this opening attack, Eastwood remained remarkably calm. He occasionally made notes on a legal pad, sometimes whispered briefly to one of his attorneys, but showed no visible reaction to the increasingly personal nature of the accusations. His weathered face remained expressionless, giving nothing away about what he might be thinking. Judge Williams seemed to interpret his silence as either arrogance or ignorance. During a brief recess, she was overheard telling a court clerk, "These Hollywood types always think they can charm their way out of anything. This one's in for a rude awakening." When the proceedings resumed, the attacks on Eastwood became even more pointed. Peterson presented email exchanges where Eastwood had requested changes to the construction plans. He read them aloud in a mocking tone, emphasizing what he called unrealistic demands and amateur understanding of construction processes. "Your Honor," Peterson said with obvious satisfaction, "these emails show a man who thinks he can build a luxury resort the same way he makes a movie, with unlimited do-overs and no regard for budgets or contracts." He held up a thick folder. "We have documentation showing that Mr. Eastwood made over 40 separate change requests during the first month of construction alone." Judge Williams shook her head in apparent disgust. 40 changes in 1 month? Mr. Eastwood, do you have any idea how construction projects actually work?" She didn't wait for an answer. "This isn't Hollywood where you can call cut and start over. Real construction involves real money, real deadlines, and real consequences." The courtroom atmosphere grew increasingly hostile toward Eastwood. Spectators began whispering more openly, and some even laughed out loud when Peterson made particularly cutting remarks about actors who thought they could handle business deals beyond their understanding. "The evidence will show," Peterson continued, "that Mr. Eastwood entered into this contract with the same casual attitude he might bring to choosing which movie to make next. But construction isn't make-believe. When you sign a contract in the real world, you're expected to honor it." Judge Williams nodded along with every word. She interrupted several times to ask Peterson clarifying questions that seemed designed to make Eastwood look even worse. "So you're saying he wanted to move the entire main building after construction had already begun?" she asked at one point. "That's not just expensive, it's completely unreasonable." As the morning wore on, it became clear that Eastwood was facing more than just a lawsuit. He was up against a judge who had already made up her mind about him, a legal team that was growing more confident by the minute, and a courtroom full of people who seemed to be enjoying watching a Hollywood legend get taken down a peg. But through it all, Eastwood remained focused on his documents. While everyone else in the room seemed to be treating this like entertainment, he continued working, reading and taking notes with the intensity of someone who knew something the rest of the room didn't. His calm in the face of such open hostility was almost unsettling. Judge Williams looked at her watch and then at Eastwood's legal team. "I suppose we'll hear from the defense next," she said with barely concealed skepticism. though I have to wonder what possible justification there could be for this kind of behavior. The stage was set for what everyone expected would be a legal massacre, with Clint Eastwood as the victim. The moment had arrived. Judge Williams looked at the defense table with that same skeptical expression she had worn all morning. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I suppose your lawyers will now attempt to explain away your behavior." She glanced at his legal team. "Please proceed with your opening statement." But instead of his lead attorney standing up, something unexpected happened. Clint Eastwood himself slowly rose from his chair. The packed courtroom fell completely silent. Even the reporters stopped scribbling in their notebooks. Everyone had assumed his lawyers would do all the talking while the famous actor sat quietly in the background. "Your Honor," Eastwood said in that unmistakable gravelly voice that had made him famous, "with your permission, I'd like to address the court myself." Judge Williams looked surprised, almost annoyed. "Mr. Eastwood, you have qualified attorneys present. I strongly suggest you let them handle the legal arguments." "I understand, Your Honor," Eastwood replied calmly. "But this is my case, my reputation, and my money on the line. I think I should be the one to explain what really happened here." There was something different about his tone. Gone was the quiet, almost passive demeanor he had shown all morning. When he spoke now, there was a confidence that seemed to fill the entire courtroom. Judge Williams hesitated for a moment, then waved her hand dismissively. "Very well, Mr. Eastwood. But I warn you, this isn't a movie. You can't just wing it and hope for the best." Eastwood nodded and moved to the center of the courtroom. For a moment, he stood there silently, looking at the judge, then at the jury, then at the construction company's legal team. When he finally began to speak, his voice was steady and clear. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has painted a picture of me as some kind of demanding celebrity who doesn't understand how business works," he began. "They want you to believe I made unreasonable changes to a construction contract because I thought I could treat it like a movie script." He paused, letting that sink in. But the evidence tells a very different story. From his jacket pocket, Eastwood pulled out a small notebook, worn from use. "On March 15th of last year, I met with representatives from Coastal Construction Group. During that meeting, I specifically asked about soil stability tests for the proposed building site." He opened the notebook and read from it. "Their project manager, Rodriguez, assured me that all necessary geological surveys had been completed and that the site was suitable for the proposed structure." Judge Williams frowned. This wasn't what she had expected. Eastwood was speaking with the precision of someone who had done his homework, not the rambling of a confused celebrity. Eastwood continued, "However, on April 3rd, I received a report from an independent geological firm I had hired." He reached into a folder and pulled out a thick document. "This report, which I'm submitting as Exhibit A, clearly shows that the original site surveys were incomplete and that the proposed location had significant structural problems that would make construction dangerous and potentially illegal." Juan Liao, construction company's lead attorney Peterson, looked uncomfortable. He began shuffling through his papers, clearly searching for something. Judge Williams leaned forward, suddenly paying much closer attention. "You see, Your Honor," Eastwood said, his voice growing stronger, "the changes I requested weren't the whims of an unreasonable client. They were necessary modifications based on safety concerns and legal requirements that the construction company had failed to identify." He turned to face Peterson directly. "Section 1804.5 of the California Building Code requires specific foundation requirements for coastal construction on unstable soil. The original plans completely ignored these requirements." The room was dead silent. People were leaning forward, in their seats, straining to hear every word. This was not the bumbling celebrity defense anyone had expected. Eastwood reached for another document. "Furthermore, California Civil Code Section 896 clearly states that contractors have a legal obligation to build in accordance with all applicable building standards and safety requirements. The plaintiff's original plans violated at least 6 different building codes, which I documented and reported to them in writing." Judge Williams was no longer looking skeptical. She was looking genuinely interested, even impressed. Mr. Eastwood, are you saying the construction company presented you with plans that violated building codes? That's exactly what I'm saying. Your Honor? Eastwood pulled out another folder, this one even thicker than the first. I spent 3 months consulting with structural engineers, environmental specialists, and building code experts. Every single one of them confirmed that the original plans were not just flawed, they were potentially dangerous. Peterson finally found what he was looking for and jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is all very interesting, but Mr. Eastwood can't just make these claims without proper documentation and expert testimony. Eastwood turned to look at Peterson with that famous squint that had intimidated countless movie villains. You're absolutely right, he said calmly. Which is why I have documentation for everything I'm about to tell this court. What happened next left everyone in the courtroom speechless. Eastwood began pulling out document after document, each one organized with tabs and notes. He had correspondence with building inspectors, reports from 3 different engineering firms, emails with environmental agencies, and detailed photographs showing the problems with the construction site. On May 12th, Eastwood continued, I sent a detailed letter to Coastal Construction outlining all of these issues. I requested that they modify the plans to meet safety requirements and building codes. Their response, which I'm submitting as Exhibit F, was to tell me that such changes would be too expensive and that I should trust their expertise. Judge Williams was now sitting forward, completely engaged. Let me see that correspondence, she said. As Eastwood handed over the documents, he continued his presentation. Your Honor, I didn't walk away from this project because I'm a demanding celebrity. I walked away because the construction company was asking me to sign off on a building that could potentially collapse and hurt people. As someone who has served as mayor of Carmel by the Sea, I understand the legal and moral obligations that come with development projects. This was the first time anyone in the courtroom had heard mention of Eastwood's political experience. Judge Williams looked up from the documents she was reviewing. You served as mayor? Yes, Your Honor, from 1986 to 1988. During that time, I dealt extensively with construction permits, building codes, and development regulations. I learned that when you're responsible for a project, you're not just responsible for the money. You're responsible for the safety of everyone who will use that building. The construction company's legal team was frantically whispering among themselves. This was not going according to their plan at all. Peterson stood up again, clearly desperate to regain control of the situation. Your Honor, even if Mr. Eastwood's concerns were valid, he had no right to simply abandon the contract without following proper procedures. Eastwood smiled for the first time all day. It wasn't a friendly smile. Mr. Peterson, perhaps you should review California Civil Code Section 1689. It clearly states that a party may rescind a contract when the other party has misrepresented material facts or failed to disclose information that would affect the safety and legality of the project. The courtroom was buzzing now. People were turning to each other, whispering in amazement. This was not the Clint Eastwood they had expected to see. Judge Williams looked at the documents in front of her. Then, back at Eastwood, her expression completely transformed from mockery to genuine respect. Judge Williams set down the stack of documents she had been reviewing and looked directly at Clint Eastwood. The transformation in her expression was remarkable. Gone was the condescending smirk she had worn all morning. In its place was something that looked very much like professional respect. Mr. Eastwood, she said slowly, these documents appear to be quite thorough. Can you tell the court exactly how you came to possess such detailed knowledge of California construction law? Eastwood walked back to his table and picked up another folder, this one even more organized than the others. Your Honor, when I first considered this development project, I knew I needed to educate myself. I wasn't going to be one of those celebrities who signs contracts without understanding what they're getting into. He opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be a study schedule, complete with dates, times, and topics. I spent 6 months preparing for this project. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I met with a construction law professor from UC Berkeley. Professor Chen helped me understand everything from basic building codes to complex environmental regulations. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes and were simply listening in amazement. This was a side of Clint Eastwood that no one had ever seen before. On Saturdays, Eastwood continued, I worked with a retired building inspector who taught me how to read architectural plans and identify potential problems. His name is Tom Miller, and he spent 30 years with the Monterey County Building Department before he retired. He paused and looked at Peterson. I can provide his contact information if the court needs to verify this. Peterson was frantically taking notes now, clearly trying to figure out how to deal with this unexpected development. His confident demeanor from earlier in the day had completely evaporated. Eastwood wasn't finished. I also spent considerable time studying the specific challenges of coastal construction. Living in Carmel for most of my adult life, I've seen what happens when buildings aren't properly designed for our climate and soil conditions. He pulled out a photograph showing a collapsed building. This was a restaurant that was built in 1998 without proper foundation work. It collapsed during the winter storms of 2016, fortunately when no one was inside. Judge Williams examined the photograph carefully. You're saying you anticipated these kinds of problems with your project? Exactly, Your Honor. That's why I insisted on the additional geological surveys that the construction company said were unnecessary. Eastwood reached for another document. This is the report from Pacific Geological Services dated April 3rd. It clearly shows that the original site would have required significant additional foundation work to meet safety standards. As Eastwood continued his presentation, the depth of his preparation became even more apparent. He didn't just have documents, he had a complete understanding of how they all fit together. He explained complex engineering concepts in simple terms, referenced specific building codes from memory, and demonstrated a grasp of construction law that impressed everyone in the room. Your Honor, Eastwood said, my experience as mayor of Carmel taught me that development projects affect entire communities. When you approve a building, you're not just responsible to the property owner. You're responsible to everyone who lives nearby, everyone who works in the building, and everyone who visits it. He walked over to an easel that had been set up near the jury box and placed a large chart on it. This timeline shows exactly what happened during our negotiations with coastal construction. Every red mark indicates a safety concern I raised. Every blue mark shows their response, which was usually to tell me not to worry about it. The chart was incredibly detailed, with dozens of entries spanning several months. It painted a picture of a client who was not being demanding or unreasonable, but rather someone who was genuinely concerned about safety and legal compliance. On June 15th, Eastwood said, pointing to a specific entry on the chart, I discovered that the construction company had not obtained proper permits for the coastal development. This is required under the California Coastal Act, and failure to comply can result in massive fines and forced demolition of any structures built without permits. Judge Williams was taking notes now, something she rarely did during testimony. Mr. Eastwood, are you saying they wanted you to proceed with construction without the necessary coastal permits? That's exactly what I'm saying, Your Honor. When I raised this issue, their project manager told me that permits were just paperwork and that we could sort it out later. Eastwood's voice carried a hint of the steel that had made him famous in westerns. But I learned during my time as mayor that permits aren't just paperwork. They're legal requirements designed to protect both the environment and public safety. The construction company's legal team was in full crisis mode now. Peterson was whispering urgently with his colleagues, and they were all frantically searching through their own documents. It was becoming clear that they had not expected to face this level of legal sophistication from their opponent. Eastwood returned to his timeline chart. The breaking point came on July 22nd when I received this letter from the California Coastal Commission. He held up an official-looking document. They had learned about the project and were threatening to shut it down entirely because no one had applied for the required permits. At that point, I realized that coastal construction had put me in a position where I could face serious legal consequences for their mistakes. Judge Williams looked at the construction company's table. Mr. Peterson, did your client fail to obtain coastal development permits before beginning this project? Peterson stood up slowly, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, There may have been some delays in the permitting process, but that's not unusual in coastal development projects. Eastwood smiled that dangerous smile again. Your Honor, with respect to Mr. Peterson, that's not accurate. According to the Coastal Commission's records, which I obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, no permit application was ever filed for this project. The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Judge Williams had to use her gavel to restore order. When quiet returned, she looked at Eastwood with something approaching admiration. Mr. Eastwood, you filed a Freedom of Information Act request? Yes, Your Honor. It's a basic research tool that anyone can use to verify claims made by contractors or government agencies. I learned about it during my mayoral term when we had to investigate some questionable development proposals in Carmel. Eastwood walked back to his table and picked up yet another folder. This folder contains correspondence with 5 different government agencies, 3 environmental groups, and 2 citizen watchdog organizations. Every single one of them confirmed that the original construction plans violated multiple regulations and would likely result in legal action against any property owner who proceeded with the project. The revelation was staggering. This wasn't just a celebrity who had gotten cold feet about a construction project. This was someone who had done more thorough research than most professional developers would have done. Your Honor, Eastwood continued, I didn't abandon this contract lightly. I spent thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours trying to find a way to make it work legally and safely. But ultimately, I had to choose between proceeding with a project that could have resulted in criminal charges against me or walking away from a substantial financial investment. Judge Williams set down her pen and looked at Eastwood with newfound respect. Mr. Eastwood, I have to admit that your level of preparation and legal understanding is quite impressive. It's clear that you took this project very seriously. The transformation in the courtroom was complete. What had started as a David versus Goliath story had become something entirely different, a tale of thorough preparation triumphing over assumptions and prejudice. The courtroom had transformed completely from the circus atmosphere of the morning. What had started as a spectacle to watch a Hollywood legend get humbled had become something far more powerful, a demonstration of how preparation, knowledge, and integrity could triumph over prejudice and assumptions. Judge Williams called for a brief recess to review all the documents Eastwood had presented. During the break, the atmosphere in the hallway outside the courtroom was electric. Reporters were frantically updating their stories, completely rewriting articles they had prepared about Eastwood's expected legal defeat. Spectators who had come to watch a celebrity crash and burn were instead discussing the incredible legal presentation they had just witnessed. I can't believe it, one law student whispered to another. He knows more about construction law than some of the attorneys I've seen in class. Her friend nodded in amazement. Did you see how organized his documents were? Every single paper was tabbed and cross-referenced. That's better preparation than most lawyers do. When court resumed, Judge Williams looked out over the packed room with a completely different demeanor. The condescending attitude was gone, replaced by the serious expression of a judge who had just witnessed something remarkable. Mr. Eastwood, she began, I've reviewed your documentation and I have to say that your research and preparation are extraordinary. However, I want to hear your closing argument before I make any rulings. She paused and looked at the construction company's table. Mr. Peterson, you'll have an opportunity to respond as well. Eastwood stood up one final time, and when he did, the room fell completely silent. Everyone could sense that this was the moment that would determine not just the outcome of the case, but how this entire story would be remembered. Your Honor, Eastwood began, his voice carrying the weight of all the evidence he had presented. This case is really about responsibility. When I decided to invest in this development project, I knew I had a responsibility to my community, to the environment, and to anyone who would eventually use the building we were planning to construct. He walked slowly toward the center of the courtroom, his presence commanding attention from every person in the room. The construction company wanted me to sign contracts and write checks without asking questions. They wanted me to trust their expertise and not worry about the details. But I learned a long time ago that when you put your name on something, you're responsible for everything that comes after. Eastwood turned to face the jury, speaking directly to them. During my time as mayor of Carmel, I saw what happens when people cut corners on construction projects. I saw buildings that collapsed because foundations weren't properly built. I saw environmental damage that took years to repair because developers didn't follow regulations. And I saw families who lost everything because they trusted contractors who promised more than they could deliver. The emotion in his voice was genuine and powerful. This wasn't an actor playing a role. This was a man who had lived through real experiences and learned real lessons. So when I started this project, I made a commitment to myself and to my community that I would do it right, even if it was harder and more expensive. He pulled out the timeline chart one more time. Every change I requested, every question I asked, every permit I insisted on, all of it was designed to ensure that we were building something safe, legal, and responsible. Judge Williams was listening intently, occasionally nodding as Eastwood spoke. The transformation in her attitude was remarkable to witness. Your Honor, Eastwood continued, Coastal Construction Group is asking this court to award them damages because I refused to proceed with a project that would have violated building codes, environmental regulations, and coastal development laws. They want to be paid for work they were never legally authorized to do in the first place. He walked over to his table and picked up the folder containing the Coastal Commission correspondence. If I had proceeded with their original plans, I would be facing criminal charges right now for unpermitted coastal development. I would be looking at millions of dollars in fines from environmental agencies. And worst of all, I might have been responsible for a building that could have hurt people. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the court reporter seemed to be holding her breath as Eastwood delivered his closing argument. This case isn't about a demanding celebrity who changed his mind about a construction project, Eastwood said firmly. This is about a construction company that promised to deliver a legal, safe building and then tried to pressure their client into accepting something that was neither legal nor safe, when those promises proved false. Eastwood paused and looked directly at Judge Williams. Your Honor, I respectfully request that this court not only dismiss the plaintiff's claims but also award damages to compensate me for the time and money I spent discovering and documenting their failures. Because the real victim in this case isn't the construction company, it's the client who trusted them to do their job properly. When Eastwood finished speaking and returned to his seat, the silence in the courtroom was profound. Even Peterson, the construction company's attorney, seemed reluctant to stand up and respond. When he finally did, his closing argument was half-hearted and defensive, focusing mainly on technicalities rather than addressing the substantial evidence Eastwood had presented. Judge Williams didn't take long to deliberate. After a brief recess, she returned to the bench with a decision that would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. In my 23 years on this bench, she began, I have rarely seen such thorough preparation and such comprehensive understanding of complex legal issues from a non-attorney. Mr. Eastwood, your presentation today has been nothing short of remarkable. She looked directly at him as she continued. More importantly, your evidence clearly demonstrates that the plaintiff failed to meet their basic obligations under the construction contract. They presented plans that violated building codes, failed to obtain necessary permits, and then attempted to pressure you into proceeding with an illegal project. The judge's voice grew stronger as she delivered her ruling. Not only do I dismiss all claims against Mr. Eastwood, but I am awarding him damages in the amount of $750,000 to compensate for his costs in investigating this project and defending against this lawsuit. The courtroom erupted in surprised gasps and scattered applause. Judge Williams used her gavel to restore order, but even she seemed pleased with the reaction. Furthermore, she continued, I want to address something that has bothered me throughout this proceeding. At the beginning of this case, I made assumptions about Mr. Eastwood based on his profession rather than his preparation. That was wrong of me, and I want to publicly apologize. The apology was unprecedented. Judges rarely admitted to making mistakes in open court, especially not in front of packed galleries and news cameras. Mr. Eastwood, Judge Williams said, looking directly at him, you have demonstrated that intelligence, preparation, and legal understanding are not limited to those of us with law degrees. You have also shown that taking responsibility seriously, whether as a mayor, a developer, or a defendant, is what separates true professionals from those who simply talk a good game. As the proceedings concluded and people began filing out of the courtroom, something remarkable happened. Groups of law students who had attended the trial approached Eastwood, asking questions about his research methods and his approach to understanding complex legal issues. One young woman, clearly nervous but determined, stepped forward. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm a second-year law student and I've never seen anyone present a case like that. Could you give us any advice about how to prepare for complex legal arguments?" Eastwood smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him all day. "The same way you prepare for anything important," he said. "You do your homework, you respect the process, and you never assume you know enough. Whether you're making a movie or fighting a lawsuit, the most important thing is knowing your material." As Eastwood left the courthouse that day, he had done more than just win a legal case. He had proven that respect, preparation, and integrity could triumph over prejudice and assumptions, no matter what arena you found yourself in.